rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining lights on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they pause the spinning and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view.
Hey everybody, it's Razib Khan with Conversation number 31. I always forget.
32.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so the file name is 32. I always forget what number we're on. But like they're not going to see that. You don't need to break the fourth wall or whatever. Show them like what goes on behind the scenes. We're doing 31. And we'll do like something a little different. So we're gonna try to get on our friend Ross Douthat, or Douthat, as some people say. Look, I mean, like he doesn't have an excuse to be
Wow.
Huguenot or French. Like it's apparently some weird English like last name. I mean, like why couldn't they change it to something like American?
Is it Norman?
Maybe that's what it is, but
Yeah.
like
We'll have to ask him.
anglicized it. It's been 1,000 years, you know.
Well,
Like,
read Gregory Clark. 1,000 years is not that long of a time, I would suppose. But
that's fair. That's fair. So one of Gregory Clark's quite funny insights that he always brings up when I run into him and talk to him about this is French people with French ancestry in the United States do quite well.
Yeah.
Who are because a lot of them are Huguenots, or they're relatively recent immigrants who escaped France because they're not lazy, basically.
Yes, right.
That's like, if you meet a French person in America, chances are they're not lazy because they really miss the food,
Yeah.
but they make the sacrifice because they want to make a lot of money and do something. But French Canadians have consistently lower socioeconomic status than their norm, and they just never improve. And so, if you meet a person with a French surname or a French surname and they're high socioeconomic status, you could have some priors on that.
Yeah.
So, and the Normans, what you're alluding to is people with Norman surnames in the UK are still higher socioeconomic status 1,000 years later, and that is interesting because there's an intuition that people have that after 3 or 4 generations, social status should decay when you look at the heritability of income and other things. The issue with that heritability estimate is it's often calculated from generation 1 to generation 2. And Greg Clark's argument, and I know that this is tendentious among some economic historians, is that one generation jump is quite noisy, and people are catching a lot of noise and regression to the mean and whatnot, and so they're underestimating long-term persistence of status, right?
Yeah, you could be. I mean, if you had like a business, if you're a businessman or whatever, and one of your kids is a professor, they're not necessarily going to make that much money, but then their kid could become another elite businessman or what. So it kind of averages out, I guess, is the thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, an example that Clark will explicitly give and other people's talked about is that during the Cultural Revolution and after, basically in the first couple of decades of communist rule of China, the PRC, People's Republic of China, there was an explicit attempt to promote people from the working class and an explicit attempt to push people out of the way who were from the traditional elite of, say, like the rural gentry, which Mao himself actually came from. I think Deng Xiaoping also did. But in any case, that reduced the number of people of rural gentry background a lot, obviously. But when you're looking now in the 21st century and who's doing well in business and in the party, it turns out that when you do the genealogies, the rural gentry people just came back once the explicit proactive pressure was gone. So the people that were serving the last Manchu emperors and the Dowager Empress Gigi, if you watch Empire of the Sun, and then like the early Republic, their descendants are now like running the PRC and like running their businesses and running the party. And so that's the argument with like long-term inheritance of social status. And this is actually
It's
Okay, this is like it's a different topic I've been talking about, but like I want to say one thing. Like I have friends in academia, and we're going to talk about academia later. Where okay, a friend is a professor. His mom, he's from like a very working class Irish Catholic background. Single mom. I think he kind of knows who his dad is, but like not in his life. White guy, obviously, and now he's a tenured professor. And we were just talking about how it was kind of difficult for him in terms of social status and class, because obviously academics are actually more privileged than a lot of other professions because you need so much tacit network compared to just even being a doctor. Well, but he bought into the idea that well, like since he's white, he has all those privileges now, and
right.
that he's like totally transitioned. And like I said, you couldn't mostly unless you get to know him, you can't tell him that you can't tell he's from a barely working class background. Like I mean, they weren't like destitute, but anyway, but like I kind of brought up these ideas with him, and he was like totally surprised and
Yeah.
frankly not quite happy because he just thought, oh, I'm a white person who has like a professional class job, so I get all the privileges forever now. My kids are fine, and I was like, well, I mean, like, bro, like when I talk to you there are things that come up, and it's quite obvious you're not from a suburban upper middle class background. But talking, you say you talk.
Yeah. I mean, and this wasn't even on the topic list, but it is the Greg Clark stuff. I mean, it's really it's hard to even fit my mind around it. It's one thing because he talks a lot about England and because he's using surname analysis, right, to try and figure out okay rare surnames basically. Because like if Smith, it wouldn't matter, but if you have a surname where it's rare enough, then you can basically trace the whole genealogy back however many hundreds of years if you have records. And for England, I have this image
Like Douthat.
like Douthat. Yes, exactly. Um, and so you have like we have this stereotype of England as being a kind of class-ridden society, especially in the past. So okay, maybe that makes sense that the social status tends to be maintained over the generations. But then Greg Clark, he's like, well, the same is that also true in the United States. It's true elsewhere in Europe. It's true, as you mentioned, even communism, right? Doesn't alter this, maybe for like a generation. But Maoism, he did it in Hungary. The only place my recollection of his book, The Sun Also Rises, SOUN, because he likes Ernest Hemingway puns for the titles of all his books. But my recollection is he did this analysis for all these countries. Is basically it's always the same. Social mobility is always like very low, except in India where it's like non-existent, basically.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
oh, India
That
is
was
slightly different. Even like there, it's like okay, so that so yeah, I mean, this is like if you take this seriously, if you think it's true, this does have like very radical implications, and I know Clark himself has said, and I think he's sincere about this. Sometimes what I'm about to say, people will say like because his ideas are maybe considered like right wing or whatever. But he has said that coming to these views has made him more like in favor of kind of Bernie style
Which is
welfare
redistribution.
redistribution. Yeah, because he's like, well, why would you not like one of the reasons you don't want to do redistribution is because like okay you're going to tax people who were successful. You're going to that's going to dampen down success, and you want equality of opportunity or whatever. But if the reality is, look, no matter what you do, certain people are going to be strivers and be on top, and other people are just not going to make it or whatever. Then maybe that is an argument for more redistribution. I don't know. I don't personally buy it, but I could see how you could
There's
think
a logic to it.
there's a logic to it. Yeah, and he's also said, I mean, and this gets into something else. Is like basically, I heard him on an interview where he's like, you want to do, maybe you could cut back on education funding and spend more on healthcare funding.
The next topic, so what we want to talk about is so basically, there's some Twitter posts. I did a Twitter post, and part of the issue is like, we talked about like, we're 1 month into Trump, and honestly, like, Josiah, like, we're both of a certain age, and we've seen things happen. Like, story I will tell is I watched the McLaughlin Group in 1995. This is before the campaign really started, and they predicted like who would win for the election, and it was like right after Contract with America, Republican Revolution, and Eleanor Clift, who's like a very like cringy partisan, she was a very cringy partisan Democrat. She always would support the Democrats no matter what and predict that Bill Clinton would win no matter what, obviously. But
Yeah.
they all were like very convinced that Bill Clinton would lose because it's after 94.
Right.
And Eleanor Clift all said like, no, you guys are wrong. But she clearly was lying. Like you could tell
Right.
she was very convinced Bill Clinton would lose. And I'm like I'm a kid then. I'm not that old at that point. And I'm just like, look, we got a year and a half. Are you guys really sure? But, like, these pundits were just, like, so tunnel vision because they're just, like, they're, like, in this world where everyone's giving them feedback, and so I always tell people, like, just be really careful about what it's gonna be like a year from now or even 6 months from now. Like, you don't know what, like, external shocks there could be, like, people forget, and so right now, we're, like, a month into, like, Trump 2. There's a lot of euphoria, we're in Trump's America and all that stuff, and, obviously, I've, like, played into some of that because, like, you need to have a sense of optimism and that things are going in the direction you want them to go. Uh, but like, let's like get real. Like we have a lot of historical, historical, evidence, and like some of it is not like explicitly political. So like for example, some of the racism on Twitter by some of the accounts, like they're like, yeah, we all racist now. I'm like, you know what? No, like, Elon like let go some censorship, but most people that you talk to, like they will be like, what the hell is wrong with you? So the world, America is not that different compared to what it was at the end of the Biden. There was like a shift on the margins. Shifts on the margins can change the whole culture, obviously, in certain ways.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have a thermostatic response, in my opinion. The Republicans barely have the House. They barely have the House.
Yeah.
The Senate they'll probably keep just because of structural reasons. But, like, I mean, if you want me, I would put down like $500 that the Democrats would win the House. I'm not like 99% confident, but I'm like
It's plus EV. Yeah.
75, 70. I would like bet on it. For me, like I could do that. That amount of money would be okay for me. I think I'm gonna get that, and I think people should be like realistic. But the Democrats have some structural problems, and that's what I'm gonna talk about right now, and then you get your response. And it's basically during the Great Awakening, I mean, basically, after 2015, but really around 2020, they had some house cleaning at the staff levels, at the operative levels. And if you look at Obama's 2008, war room, it was notoriously white, like often white male, and actually, like most of those were Jewish guys. Okay,
Right.
That's who won Obama 2008. The Obama machine, I think David Plouffe is Jewish. I'm not sure if he's Jewish, but like Axelrod's Jewish. Anyway, the point is, there's a lot of, and I'm not like saying this like the JQ or anything. Don't
Yeah.
get the wrong impression. But like, there's a lot of Jewish people who have been very powerful and influential, Jewish men in particular, in high level democratic politics. Well, that's like not representational. It's not representation. It's not inclusive, and so a lot of women were brought in, a lot of underrepresented minorities, and for example, and like one of the things that the Democrats did was like really, really center black women, right? So Kamala, who's half black, identifies as black, ran, and like more staff were black women and all this stuff. Well, this is like just being like totally like honest. There was a degradation in competence and skill level when you went from Jewish men to, traditionally marginalized, quote, marginalized, underrepresented groups. And that's affected Democratic performance definitely on the margin, is what Democratic Operative told me. And other people have said that. And Kremu on Twitter mentioned that. And other people also messaged and said, yes, that's totally true, who were Democrats. And a friend of ours, I'm not going to say who it is, but a friend of ours in conservative politics message was like, I mean, I'm happy about this, but I think you're totally right because I think the Kamala campaign was run for all the money that it had, was run in a relatively lax and just like relaxed in a relaxed way. like in terms of her schedule and all the things that they did. Like he felt that it was actually kind of phoned in, and he suspects that it's because like of a competence issue. So we're gonna have the Democrats probably win in 2026 the House. That will probably convince them they need to do nothing.
Right.
And so I think that they will probably set themselves up for a 1988 type of situation where they don't reconstruct enough and the Republican probably wins. And then after 2028, will they really have to, look back on how they changed in the teens and maybe reconsider? That's my take there.
Okay. I have a couple of points. One, I do think that this trend that you or Cremu or whoever was talking to Cremu or whatever is alluding to is real, and it is kind of there's a kind of poetic justice to it. I think in that if you if your ideology is about degrading merit and saying merit should not be the basis for hiring and other things like a broader society. Well, that's also going to be, unless you're big hypocrites, that's also going to be the case for especially for your own organizations. And over time, that's going to make your own organizations less effective potentially. I think, and I definitely see if you look at, I mean, I noticed this, not just a Democrat thing, but you read about the 60s protests and like, you know, radical movement back in the 60s versus today. And like back then, I think that their ideas were bad, crazy, whatever in a lot of cases. But you had a lot of people who the leaders, a lot of these radical movements were pretty sharp. Whether it's Bill Ayers or Noam Chomsky or whoever. And you compare that to like, well, who are the like big thinkers of like 2020 or whatever, and it's people like Ibram X Kendi. I'm even blanking on the white Robin DiAngelo. Yeah,
Robin DiAngelo, yeah.
I can't even remember her name anymore. But yeah,
Lightweights.
She was a big, yeah, right. I mean, these are not smart people, I think you have to say. And a lot of the organization, like you look at like the ACLU back in the 60s versus the ACLU now, and I would say it's a lot less effective and, a little bit like more less principled. And I think the staffing thing definitely has something to do with that. Now, and I also think that you are right that if the Democrats, as is probably more likely than not, retake the House, maybe that'll blunt a little bit their need to feel like they have to change. Now, one thing I will say, and this is something that I have found kind of striking, is that if you look throughout the developed world, a lot of places in the like developed countries over the last 10 to 15 years, the center left has just kind of been decimated. We're about to have, as we're recording this, there's Germany is having their election, right? And if you look at the polling, if you look at all the discussion, people are talking about, Alternative for Deutschland, which is the, quote unquote far right party. But who are they up against? They're up against the CSU, CDU, the center right people. It looks like the SDP, the traditional center left party in Germany, which, was a huge major party. It looks like it's just going to kind of be decimated, and you've seen that also. You saw that in France. Um, in Canada right now, the Liberal Party is in charge, but they're about to have an election, and they were looking like they're going to get totally wiped out. So, throughout the developed world, center left parties have just been totally annihilated in all sorts of different countries, and it is striking that the United States seems to be an exception, right? Which is not to say that they win. Obviously, they lost the last election. They, you know, uh, They don't control the House, the Senate, or the presidency, right? But it's still kind of close. It's still kind of a 45-45 nation. And maybe that has something to do with our political system. You know, we were famously just like a strong two-party system where in a lot of these other countries, the way that this change has happened is that you've had new parties develop that are either more
Well,
right wing or more left wing, you know, and that can appeal to like you know, a populace, like a lot like the thing about like this is true for AfD in Germany. Like if you look at the map of where they're head, it's like East Germany, right? So clearly they are, even though they're a quote unquote far right party, they're appealing to a lot of former left wing voters. I think you might say, and I think that's true. That's true across the board. You know, even in the United States, we've seen some realignment, but
yeah,
only so much realignment you can have when you still only have two parties, right? So maybe that's what's helping the Democrats.
yeah. Well, also, the Republican Party is not the same party it was, 14, when Romney ran. I mean,
Right,
it's transformed over the last decade.
right.
So it's become considerably less libertarian, more, and also consider. Well, it's it's ironic because like when you say libertarian, like socially liberal, fiscally conservative,
Yeah,
it's become fiscally less conservative
right.
and socially more moderate. You know,
Certainly
so
rhetorically, that's true. Yeah. I don't know.
I
I
mean,
mean,
rhetoric, yeah.
in terms of I mean, you know, George W. Bush, if you look at his administration, it was not a fiscally conservative administration by any stretch of the.
Yeah, but yeah, that's fair. And like he was a compassionate conservative. And the Republicans always have problems executing. But obviously, the Paul Ryan Republican Party is gone.
Right, right.
Is what I'm trying to get at. Which like I'm not like
Well,
the issue with the Democrats is like they're still kind of the same party they were under Obama. There's been some modifications,
yeah,
but one of the parties from the Obama era is continuing his party. But the Republican Party, the Romney Party, and the McCain Party is gone. Like the neoconservatism is sharply attenuated,
yeah.
and Romney's kind of like they always said Romney was the guy that would fire you. Like
Right.
that's what was his problem. And, like
Well,
that party is also gone.
I guess I mean it is you know we don't have Paul Ryanism in like affect, but what is Doge like Doge? If you were to just on paper, you know, look at Doge and what it's supposed to do, it doesn't look that different from Paul Ryan. You know, it's like you could see that.
Yeah, well, we have I mean, we talked about this before though. It's like partly part of the Doge thing is there is a split among the like whatever like elite class, and
Right.
like Bannon is not into the Doge stuff,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and so like there are people. So there's we'll see. You're right. It's all for me. But in terms of the Democrats, I think they're going through some quote soul searching because like they don't know what the hell they're doing right now.
Yeah.
They replaced a lot of their like the Democratic class. They have massive problems with young men. There's this guy on Twitter that I follow. He's always like, when I've been involved in Democratic parties, he's a black guy. He's basically like you never meet a young straight white male. They're all gay if they're white, or they're minorities if they're straight. And so straight white men are I mean, they're still super important. They run a lot of things, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be a problem eventually. And they know, I've talked to Democratic operatives. They know there's going to be a problem. But for the Republicans, I mean, Doge is, some of the stuff Doge is doing, like people are really, really, really okay with cuts in abstract, but in the reality, they flip out. And there's already I think like some rumbling, Elon's not super popular, whatever. I think like the quote honeymoon will last for a little while longer. I just think people are a little unrealistic about how long it will last.
Yeah.
And the House of Representatives, yeah, Trump has a lot of influence. Also, part of the issue is like he's a lame duck. I know that, people are like, oh, like he should run again. Like I'm sorry, I just don't think an 82-year-old at that stage will want to run again.
Well, he's
Um,
also constitutionally barred from running again, so that's
yeah, but like
thing.
whatever. I'm just saying like the Republicans will try to change that. The
Well, it's
living
yeah,
constitution.
right, right, right. Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that the both of the parties, but perhaps the Democrat Party even more, are have facing a kind of identity crisis in that the self conception of the Democratic Party, for a long time was that they were the party of the little guy, the working class, right, the downtrodden, so on and so forth. But increasingly, their voter base is college educated PMC people. It's kind of striking when I go on social media now. When I go on X, obviously there's a lot of conservative content, a lot of right wing content or whatever. But when I go on Facebook, um, it's almost like a blue sky light. I mean, there's still like pictures of people's kids or whatever, but I would estimate about a third of my Facebook feed now is just various people that I know posting anti-Elon content, about like how horrible Elon Musk is. Trump actually doesn't come up that much, and these are people. In some cases, these are people who these are people that I've known through school or work or other things. In some cases, they've always been liberal. In some cases, though, they probably voted for Romney. That so this is part of the realignment. So that's kind of the new base of the Democratic Party, I would say, is you know people like that. And to be honest, like those are not working class downtrodden people, but also, do they really want, the are they really big fans of the traditional Democratic Party platform? Like, are they really into unions and higher taxes and
Sure.
I don't know that that's their lodestar.
Yeah.
Social stuff, maybe, on the
Yeah. Yeah.
cultural stuff, maybe, but yeah. So that's a kind of identity crisis that they're going to have to deal with. Of like, what are they there for? Like what's their raison d'etre in terms of like what they think about, because increasingly the people that they claim to represent, like, not only is that not their base, but those people don't even support them anymore. Those people are increasingly for Trump.
Yeah, and this is, it started with the white working class, and it extended to the Latinx and Asian working class. Like Roy Teixeira's talked about it, and then even some of the black working class, especially black males, have been, starting to shift. The issue with the Democrats, like the Republicans, is that they are a coalition. So, older black Americans, for example, they're there and they still vote. There's been very little erosion.
Right.
They're just the way they were in the 80s and 90s. So that's kind of like a, back like a generation ago, black Americans in the Democratic Party were part of like Rainbow Coalition and Push and
Right.
Jesse Jackson and the left in the party. Now they're actually part of the right moderate of the party because their social views are
Right.
not conservative, but they're just more normal, middle of the road.
Yeah.
Whereas the professional managerial class, a lot of them go along with all these things and actually promote them and create them and all these things, and so there's been like a weird like reorientation there where the beer track, because the Democrats have been a wine track, beer track party.
Right.
The beer track has become, all of the white working class disappeared from the beer track, and now the beer track is minorities, even if they don't drink beer, like they're whatever. So the beer track is now minorities. The wine track is way way bigger. So Obama combined the basically the black Americans in the beer track with the wine track, and then he outvoted the white, the Hillary voters in 2008, right?
Right.
So that was his magic, and then he still kept them in the general election. And now I think you could just win with the wine track. Is what we're fighting. Like, I mean, Kamala, literally wine track. Like, she drinks a lot of wine.
Although she didn't actually do that well when she had to face voters, even when she ran in the primary or whatever. Like 2020.
Oh wait, that's fair. Although yeah, I mean,
I realize there's other factors going on, but
I think part of it is like the positionality, So I heard,
Biden's definitely a beer track guy, and
Biden is different, like literally from another age. Like the party that
right.
he represents, like doesn't even exist anymore. He's just kind of like it's like if it was like 400 AD, and like the emperor's like, by Jove, we need to go to the temple now, and everyone's like, Is someone gonna tell him we're all Christian now? You know? He's like, and he's like, someone whispers at him. He's like, the Hebrew God. But like you're laughing because like there was a lot of that to him where they would like whisper. They're like we don't believe in that anymore. He's like, what? We don't call them Negroes. It's just like he didn't mean anything by it, but like
Right.
literally, like he was obviously doing a throwback. So I think it's a weird situation where I think the Democrats are not going to reconstruct themselves. Is I guess my point.
Yeah.
But thermostatic politics is a thing. Like a lot of people voted for Trump who were like didn't vote for him in 2020, partly because they were just like sick of the Democratic staffer class doing crazy things along with what they did with immigration and inflation. You know,
And
so they were like, we don't care if Trump is like a fascist or whatever you say.
right.
We're just sick of this.
And another thing, I think this is something to some extent, I think the final shoe hasn't even dropped the Democrat Party yet, because to some extent, you mentioned Biden being like a man out of time or whatever. But if you look at, I mean, the leadership of the Democratic Party is very old. It's been it's been like Biden, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, right? Like a former generation has just been stuck around for a long, long time, and there's some of that on the Republican side too. But those people, they still have that like older mindset. They still came up the other age. Eventually, they're going to be gone, and who they are going to be replaced by are probably more towards the like, AOC type of stuff, right? So, like, I mean, they're going to be replaced by like Weintrack, heavy PMC, the people who are like Rand
Yeah, yeah.
and Elon.
You're talking about AOC, like just so the listeners and viewers know, because like not everyone like keeps track of like her district and all that. She won her primary against Joe Crowley,
Yeah.
by getting the more white, more PMC professional managerial class parts of her district. She actually consistently underperforms. The working class parts of her district voted for the guy the white establishment guy who was potentially going to be the House Speaker actually in New York in her district in the Bronx and the Queens. He got the working class minorities actually. So she's actually, even though she is herself a Puerto Rican woman and all that stuff, she is look, she's like she's like engaged to a ginger. Okay, how much more white can you get? You know what I'm trying to say? Believe them when they tell you through their actions.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think we should like probably switch now to topic number. Well, it's now kind of topic number 3 because we talked about like Greg Clark for a while, but our friend Ross Gregory Douthat, he has another book. I do have to say, some of us have been like
And he's
making
going to
fun
be
of
on
him.
the podcast next week. That's why.
Yeah, yeah. Like we like don't hold us to it because like his schedule is
Okay. All right.
is
Well, I'm holding
crazy.
I'm holding us to it. I'm holding him to it. He better be here. Everyone should subscribe.
That's fair. That's
If
fair.
not enough subscription. If he didn't show up, it's because you did not subscribe. Whoever I'm pointing my finger at right now.
Okay, because I was yeah. Okay. So he has a new book, "Believe Why Everyone Should Be Religious." So I have the book on Kindle. I haven't read it. You've read it. We'll talk about that. I do have to say though, he's 45 years old. He's been like in the opinion, whatever, domain for a while. This mofo, like, he writes a lot of books. He's a New York Times columnist, obviously, so that's a big deal. He was at the Atlantic for a while, so although like the Atlantic is so long ago, he's been at the New York Times for like 14 years now.
Yeah.
But so he has a privilege. He wrote that when he was like
That's
in
a book,
Harvard or at the end of Harvard. Yeah, Grand New Party with Rehan Salam.
right?
That also Bad Religion: How We Became a Nation of Heretics.
Right.
To Change the Church: Pope Francis and the Future of Catholicism. I didn't even know about that book. The Deep Places: A Memoir of Illness and Discovery about Lyme disease,
Yes.
which he has, I believe. The Decadent Society, which came out right before the pandemic, how we became the victim of our own success, and Believe Why Everyone Should Be Religious. Now, before you start talking about the book, which you know what, like I'm actually going to open up the contents and stuff like that right now because I can on the browser because I have the book. But just for context for a lot of people, in our like adulthood, um, things have changed a lot when it comes to religion. Like I'm an atheist. I don't believe in religion. Like, well, yeah, I'm not religious. Let's just put it that way. I don't believe in God.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, it was super weird. Like I literally had to tell people what that meant, because like, they had not heard about it. I grew up in a very conservative area, to be fair, but still, it was super weird. And so we were a normatively, like people like Bill Clinton, like they were sinners, but he was still Baptist. It's quite clear now that in the last generation, like that's kind of changed in a way. So, for example, it's pretty clear that Bernie Sanders, for example, probably doesn't believe in God, you know?
I mean, I think
Nobody
he's
br no Yeah, nobody ever, like, it's not a big deal, no one ever brought it up. Barack Hussein Obama, he famously said he believes in evolution more than angels, so, like, okay, like, what kind of Christian is that? Uh, I'm not gonna say, I mean, I think Biden's old school, he's more like Clinton, like, he's probably
I think he
he think he's Catholic, obviously, like, you as a conservative Catholic have issues with him as a liberal Catholic, but whatever, right? He goes to church a lot. Trump, uh, you know, I think he has a sympathies with Christianity just
Period.
like Elon Musk. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yes.
So our public space, I think it dates to about like in the Bush administration, the beginning of the second Bush administration, 2006, 2007. All these new atheists um, came on the scene, and I was categorized with them actually back then. And I'm just like, I'm not a new atheist. Like, I've just always been an atheist, because
Yes.
like people are like, oh, like you're one of those like hates religion. And I'm just like, I don't really hate religion. Like, I don't. It's like for me, like I don't have a traumatic experience. I was never like a believer. But over my lifetime, I've become less weird, like atypical in American society because we've become like so much more secular, still more religious than Europe by far, especially in certain areas. But it is not as normative, and in the Democratic Party in particular, and some professional managerial class environments, it is very atypical to be anything more than nominally religious. So I think, we're not going to say who, but like Ross, whose book we're going to talk about, he has said that like people have been shocked that he's told them that he believes in angels and demons, because he's a Christian. Which, like, they're like, "Whoa, you actually believe that stuff?" And he's
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I actually believe that stuff." So, I think that this book is, appropriate, why everyone should be religious, because a lot fewer people are religious than in the past, and among Gen Z, it's kinda like almost 50-50, not quite, but it's almost 50-50, right?
Yeah.
So, we're in a time of debate, and Ross is getting into it. So tell us about the book. I'm sure you love the book, but like, tell us about the book, right? Yeah.
It's a good book. I was surprised. It's unusual. I think, and this is something I want to save some, fire for future podcasts when we discuss it. But one, you're talking about Gen Z is like 50-50 religious, not religious. I think that while true can give a misleading picture because when like in those surveys or other things, we talk about are people religious or not? They're mainly talking about do you belong to some sort of organized religious denomination and are you going to some sort of religious service, on a regular basis or something? And that's definitely fallen off. But what we have seen is that when people stop going to church and they stop, they leave whatever their denomination or whatever, it doesn't mean that they become like Christopher Hitchens style secular materialists necessarily, So that that falling away mostly from Christianity, although to some extent from other religions in the United States, that's gone hand in hand with like I don't there probably are like quite a few people now who are not, they don't go to church, they don't believe in organized religion or whatever, but they do believe in angels, right? Or they believe in astrology or, other stuff like that. So, some of it like being even hooked into other stuff like psychic powers or UFOs, right? Or psychedelics, all that sort of stuff, which Ross does talk about a little bit in the book. So that I think is a big part of like what's changed about the situation. It's not that we've become a less religious society, but we haven't necessarily become a more atheistic society, right? Or a more material,
We have
a
we
more,
have a little, but like basically
yeah, a
the
little bit.
line of increased atheism is like a softer slope than the line of like no religion. That's what you're alluding to.
Correct. And it's also the case. I mean, if you look at particular, like this, and this is not all of the story, but a big part of the story has been the decline specifically of the mainline Protestant denominations, right? And to some extent, Catholicism as well. So the people who used to say like, "Oh, I'm an Episcopalian," now they'll say like, "I'm nothing," or "I'm an atheist," or whatever, right? And those people were not the most like in the 1950s or whatever. It's not like they were the most hardcore religious people to begin with, you know. I think so. You've kind of had a boiling off a little bit, which has made in some respects the remaining religious people like more fervent on average, right? I think that's true. You know, there's been less decline among like super traditionalism, and in some cases even a growth in traditionalism, because like as the mainline sinks, most of the people just become nothing, but then like a minority is like, hey, this is no longer tenable, so I'm going to go to Pentecostalism or whatever. um so yeah, so that can kind of maybe, so for those are two reasons why I would say, you know, the kind of like top line numbers might give you a overstated perspective of how much has changed, right? Because a lot of people who they used to go to church, but they didn't really think that much about God. You know, like if you ask them, they were probably in some ways similar to like Trump, you know, like where Trump says, I'm a Christian, a Presbyterian or whatever. But, and I don't know his heart, but it seems like that's not where he's devoting like his daily life or whatnot. People who were used to be like that now just say, I'm nothing. And some of the people who are now nothing, they've actually started to be more interested in like you might call it occult topics or like esoteric, you know, supernatural type stuff, you know, than before. Because I think one
Yeah.
thing that organized religion does in a lot of cases traditionally has been like to kind of cabin and channel those impulses in, you know, so like you're not, you know, you're not worrying about your chakras
Yeah.
or your like astrological sign or something, right? Although there some of that
Yeah.
there's overlap. There's overlap. Um
Yeah.
so, and Ross's book, I think the book it's kind of geared for that, for this time, you know? Like the book would have been uh like if the book had come out 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have seemed kind of weird, you know? I mean, it seemed it's a little weird now, but like it just would have been off
Yeah.
target
Yeah.
in terms of like you know what it's going for, both because it's not arguing for Christianity or anything like that. It's just arguing for like a general, you know, people should pick a religion, you know, but I'm not necessarily telling you which one, but also it's just because like, you know, the things the arguments that it's focusing on are arguments that are supposed to be designed for like 2025 society, US Western society, not 2005, you know.
Yeah. USA. Yeah.
Right.
So I just got a couple of things. I looked up some data while you were talking, so I'll just review it for the listener,
Well,
so
hopefully
we
it
can like
doesn't
anchor.
discredit anything I said, because if so,
No, I mean you're basically right. But let's first of all, the book is called "Believe: Why Everyone Should Be Religious,"
right.
and Ross should do an interview or something with Richard Dawkins, because I would love Richard Dawkins to be like, Richard Dawkins would be like, so you believe why everyone should be religious. You know, like the way he would say it, right? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, can't you just imagine him like spitting the title out?
Yeah. Although even Dawkins, I feel, has softened a little bit. You know, he talks now about the importance of like Christianity as a cultural force, another thing.
Kinda,
You would not.
kinda.
I mean, I'm not. I don't want to overstate it. I'm not
No,
saying
no, 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 no. Actually, I think there's more continuity. You just have to, like, look. Like, he has talked about Christmas even back during the New Atheist days. I just think that, I think wokeness, like, scared him straight,
right.
which is alluding to some of the stuff because I think because, you know, Richard Dawkins was basically, like, in 2006, you know, kind of at the height of cultural, but not really demographics. 'Cause it was already evident in the data in the 90s that there had been erosion starting, and it just really collapsed over the last like 20 years. But and then it's kind of tailed off. You know, it seems like we're in a new stability. But let's just like review the data real quick. Because Gallup, they have like polls going back to 1950. So in 1947, 94% of people said that they believed in God. But in 1953, 98%, 54, 98%, 65, 98%, 67, 98%. I think what that is it's called communism, is what I really think it is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
2011, not that long ago, 92% said they believe in God. When I was a kid, when we were kids in the 90s, we're 80s, 90s kids, like 95% was basically, I think, the ballpark number that people would just assume. Like 5% of people will say they don't believe in God. Okay. And then 2013, it drops to like 87, 86. You know, it's in like the high to mid 80s in the late teens. 2022, the last survey says is 81%. So it's dropped. Belief in God has dropped about, you know, let's say like a little bit, probably like in our lifetimes, probably like on the order of like 10 to 15%, you know, like 12, 13. That's like not that much like overall, but that is like, you know, a considerable shift in the baseline of people who say it, right? You run into a lot more of them, especially in certain circles, than you would otherwise. And they'll be out about it more. In terms of religious or spiritual, Gallup has that too. In 1999, which like we've talked about as the greatest year ever, 54% of people said that they're religious. Today it's 47%. So that's been a drop, but it's pretty modest. Spiritual went from 30% to 33%. It's a little bit of a growth. Both, though, people who say that they're both spiritual and religious, 9% to 18%. Okay. So that's interesting to me. And then people who are say, no, that was neither. Sorry. Neither is 9% to 18%. These are people who are not spiritual or religious by self ID. And then people who said that they're both went from 6% to 2%. And I think this is alluding to polarization of like what spiritual and religious mean. Religious nuns, who according to Pew, this year are 28% of the population, peaked at like 30% in 2022. Probably just like around, you know, high 20s is good number. 17% are atheists, 20% are agnostic, and 63% are nothing in particular. The majority of religious nuns probably do believe in God or spirituality, right? So that's what you're alluding to. And there is data from places like Ireland, which would show like a rise in astrology and other types of beliefs. What you're alluding to, I think, when we talk about religion, we're talking about like a lot of different things. You know, so like I'm probably pretty close to maximalist in terms of like mindset. Like I'm just like kind of like a materialist, naturalist type person. Whereas like there's other people that are like, well, I believe in ghosts, but I'm not Christian, you know. And well, I
Right.
mean that's not that weird. People have believed in ghosts forever.
Right.
All people, like all societies. And so there's a level of like religious intuition, religious belief that's cross-cultural and that's universal. And that's just, if you're not religious, the easiest explanation for that, like Dawkins will cop to this, is like we just have some strong intuitions about the way the universe works because that's just been adaptive in the past. So concrete example that I'm going to give is you know, most people have an intuition that there are like gods or God or something. Like they have a feeling. But I mean, the reality is, why would you have a feeling that there's somebody out there, there's something out there? Well, if you're a human being in like a forest and you think that there's something around you or around and you're wrong, okay, you just like got a little scared, wasted your time. But if you're like, nah, there's nothing. At some point you're gonna get killed and eaten, you know? So there's a strong incentive for you to actually kind of like be aware of people, things, and forces around you because you don't know what they are, right? You might like overdo it, but that's just a reality. So when most people, like I had a friend that I worked with, and I was asking him why he believed in God, in angels or like ghosts, and he's not Christian. And I remember he just said like he was like, well, because I'm human,
Right.
which is actually like he's not a very intellectual guy, but I think like, that was the right answer. But that is not what a lot of people think about when they say religion. What a lot of people think about is like what you do, like go to church on Sunday or go to temple or whatever. But that's a whole different thing that comes with like social and cultural obligations. And there's the community, and within that, there are people who are frankly, and like we know some of them personally, who are just like they barely believe in God any more than me,
Right.
but they're very, very invested in raising their children in tradition and going to this community and all of those things. And so, like, I mean, is that, I mean, like, if you're, like, for example, in Judaism, belief is less important than practice. Islam is actually, candidly, like, similar. Apostasy in Islam it's not heresy. It's not like a belief crime. It's a public disorder crime, you know? So it's like we're talking about all these different things, and I'm looking at the book a little bit. He does cover a lot of these different
Yes.
things, you know? And so it's like you're basically like coming at like the same word from like a bunch of different dimensions, and some of these definitions bundle a lot of them. But like someone like I mean, we all know, I think listeners can know, like there are people who are like communists. The way they talk about like, you know, the revolution and Marx and like the way they talked about Fidel Castro.
Right.
Okay, like maybe you should just go to church, you know?
Right.
Just
Right.
I'm just saying. Anyways, I've been talking a while, and like so that's what I just the data,
Yeah.
and I think like it's just like a big topic.
It is a big topic, and it's a little hard to disentangle. I think that there is a difference between belief in God and belief in spirits, say, right? Where this is, I think, what you were touching on, where especially if you're in like if you're a hunter gatherer or throughout most of human history, there are things out there. I mean, like what's moving the branches? If the wind is blowing, what's moving the branches? You can see something's moving the branches, right? There's so I think it's a natural idea that there are like spirits and forces out there that uh, you know uh, sometimes are dangerous, sometimes are helpful beyond your understanding, right? Um, the idea of like God as like a singular being who created, sustains the universe, all the other stuff. My That seems to be a more recent development in human history. Almost like axial age. I mean, it can be it's hard to tell, but it seems like
Yeah.
earlier societies and civilizations they didn't really have that concept exactly, the big God. Um, and that seems to be something that came in. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Well, you referred to a specific term, big God, which
yes,
comes out of school of cultural evolution. Like
right, yeah,
this, like his name is like Noriani. I don't know his Iranian American. I think evolutionary psychologist. He worked with Joe Henrik. And like he has a book called Big Gods. You guys can read it. What you're talking about with big gods is like around the axial age, which is like around 500 BC. This is like Carl Jasper's big idea. Uh, if you talk to like like basically if you talk to foragers and hunter gatherers, they all believe in gods.
right,
But like they don't necessarily think gods are good.
right, yes.
Like gods need to be like treated with respect.
Maybe placated, yeah, right,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's like you're insane if you don't treat the gods with respect because they're gonna fuck you over, you know?
yes,
But so they are very like fearful, but they don't necessarily like love their gods. They just like gods to them are like they're like the law of gravity.
right,
Right? It's just like a force of nature. But what you're talking about, the big gods, is like so they have this idea that with the rise of these complex civilizations, you have these moralistic gods that serve
right,
as arbiters in the world and the universe. And so they fused morality with the gods. Whereas like if you read Greek mythology, there's a little bit of that.
right,
We don't but some of that might have come in later. But like someone like Zeus, yeah, I don't really know if you say that's a good guy, but he's like the most powerful, right? And so, the idea we have, like humans have an idea of supernatural agents in the universe, but to bundle it together with kind of a sense of morality and ethics in such a tight way, is like definitely like a part of the evolution. And I think like Robert Wright has a book, The Evolution of God. This is just like a common sense thing. I will say though, I do believe this is not like general relativity. It's not like a super counterintuitive thing. Like that's why Christianity or Islam or all these religions can spread relatively easily to just normal people, because they're like, oh, one, that sounds better, and two, I get it. Like, they're like combining
Right.
this idea that there is like, because like people are not actually, most people, believe it or not, are like not evil. I mean, they do evil, but they're not really evil, you know? I mean, you can say that they're sinners. We don't want to get into a theological debate, but like the average person is not like going around wanting to murder people, you know?
Right.
And so like if there's like a god, if the gods say that you shouldn't murder people, and that there's like the god is like
Yeah.
observing you and will like call you into account, they're like, all right, you know what? I get it. I get it. You know what I'm saying? I think so. I think that like that makes sense. And the one thing that I will say is like, you know, different cultures are kind of different. You know, there's like a big distinction supposed to be like Abrahamic culture and like, you know, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and say Hinduism. Hindus always bring it up.
Right.
Actually, when psychologists look at it, the gap is like a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But when you look at like China in particular, is a little weird because like basically the Chinese they don't really have a normal word for a personal god, and so the missionaries have to like pick a word that they retrofit and kind of like, so like sometimes Catholics and Protestants will pick different words in East Asian languages, which will make them seem like way more different.
Yes. Right.
Right. So I think I think that the Chinese like Protestants normally use like Wang Di, like Shanghua Di or something, like Lord on high,
Mhm.
whereas Catholics picked heaven.
Right.
So the Lord on high was like what the Shang dynasty worshipped. It was like an ancestral god for the Shang royal family.
Yeah.
And so that's like a personal god. And there's a Chinese philosopher, a utilitarian philosopher, basically, altruistic utilitarian, Moza, who like resuscitated. That's like the closest to a Christian style personal god that you had. Whereas like the Catholics, the Jesuits, they were just like, well, we want to like get good with the Confucians, so we're gonna call God the word heaven,
Yeah.
but like personalized heaven. And obviously that caused issues. I will let you talk a little bit. Like one last thing is what was I gonna say? No, I mean yeah, you go now. I just want to bring that up.
Yeah. And then I think there's also another element, which is, I don't think that, like, strictly speaking, just belief in God, I don't know is necessarily a religious. Just believing in God, I don't know, makes you religious. You know, if you're a deist, or if you believe like in the Aristotelian unmoved mover or whatever, right? And then that's it. Then I'm not sure. That seems much closer to atheism than to any form of like standard religion to me. I was thinking about this in terms of like the singularity, right? So this is idea that our reality, we're actually in the matrix. It's some sort of computer simulation, and if that's true, then of course there is some sort of creator of the universe, right? Whoever made the simulation, single person or whatever. But so if you believe that, there's some people who claim that they believe that or think it's likely or whatever. But so if you believe that, is that religious? I if To me, I think religion also, you have to believe not only that there's some sort of higher power, but that the higher power like has some purpose for your life. You know, either it's some sort of set of rules or rituals are very important to do, or other things where it's like need to, like, you got to change your life in some way in accordance with the goals and purposes of this higher power. Otherwise, it's just like, it's a little bit like, believing in God is just a little bit like believing in gravity. You know, it's like, okay, this is like a fundamental force of the universe, but
Yeah.
unless he cares about me in particular and wants me to do things or not do things, then like, how is that? So I think that is like a key part of religion. Whether it's like more transactional in the like old school where you're trying to placate the gods, or if it's like this more purposive, thing where you're trying to like
Yeah.
follow what the deity wants, right? So I think that's a kind of important, and that seems to be also true, like even in like Buddhism. I know there are versions of Buddhism that are more theistic, but even if it's like a, a non-theistic version of Buddhism, you do have that element where like, okay, maybe it's not God per se, but the universe, however you want to say it, there, the truths, right? You've got to.
Yeah, there's a way to live
Yes.
appropriately,
Yes, correct.
right? So the way I would summarize it, and like, I'm gonna be so I'm listening to you talk, like I can like think of it in a concise way.
Okay.
You could like theism, like say like just traditional theism, in the great religions. Let's put it like including like forms of Hinduism as well. God is the ground of being,
Yes.
whereas like if you're a deist, God is the ground of causality. And
Right.
those are just like,
Right.
I mean, God is also the ground of causality. I think in the former case, not always. 'Cause,
Yeah,
like I think
both.
in Hinduism, if you believe in cyclical, but anyway, my point is like, yeah, God is like kind of like the foundation of morality and like right practice, right living, and right purpose, as opposed to just like an aspect of physics, right? Which is what what the simulation hypothesis would be. But I mean, so looking at like Ross's book, like he kind of like starts from. I mean, it's really interesting because it's like I think this is like geared towards like kind of Americans of this age, of maybe like younger millennials or so, who grew up kind of secular and just like are vague about. They're not even like militant atheists or anything. They just like don't know,
Right.
right? That
Yeah.
I'm looking at it. That looks like it's to target.
Yeah, and I think the like angle of attack is different. There's one of the early chapters in there is about physics and fine tuning and so on and so forth. And that was a chapter where I was reading that, I was like, okay, this is something that could have been in like a standard, 2010 era book responding to new atheism or whatever, right? But then he starts talking about psychic powers and faith healing, faith healings and UFOs, other stuff like that, which definitely would not you wouldn't find it in a book like that. So I think it's definitely geared towards that. Probably we should not talk about this too much more.
Yeah, we'll get it with Ross. Okay, why don't we so we talk about God and religion.
Yes,
Now we're gonna cut to science.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
and
that's not pretty good.
science
It's
you got to
pretty
pay. Religion you get for free. Science you got to pay.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to conversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. broke soft on dewy grass. They smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the common understanding they reach after their debate. Would you like me to expand on any aspect